What do you make about this Nottingham Forest Crystal Palace story? Because Nottingham Forest, are they right to put pressure on UEFA at the expense of a fellow Premier League side, or is it ultimately dog eat dog when it comes to fighting your corner as a club owner? Forest have written to UEFA with their concerns about Crystal Palace participating in the Europa League when they could be in breach of multi-club ownership rules.
Well, I'm trying to put myself in a situation where I wonder what I would do. Obviously, I've got vested interest because it's my former football club and my allegiance is with them. And I'm trying to work out, if I were Nottingham Forest, would I feel the necessity to put my two penneth in when UEFA have already made their position clear that Crystal Palace need to find a solution to the problem? Crystal Palace and Lyon need to find a solution to the potential problem that they've got, and I don't think it needs Nottingham Forest to put their two penneth in. But Marinakis being Marinakis, he will suggest that actually we had the foresight to avoid the same problem. I mean, the ridiculousness of this all is that if Nottingham Forest needs some money during the course of next season, who are they going to go to? They're going to go to Marinakis because he's the only person that's going to write a cheque out. The fact he's put his shareholding and resigned as a director of Nottingham Forest and put his shareholding into a blind trust to get himself around European rules tells you that the rules themselves are slightly ludicrous. You either allow multi-club ownership and you run the gauntlet of what it represents, or you don't allow it. It was okay if you were going to allow multi-club ownership and you suggest that in one federation you play your own South American team and your own European team. They're not like to play one another besides the construct of the new FIFA World Club Championship, but as a matter of course, they ain't like to play one another in competitive tournaments, so it's not an issue. But when you allow it to happen in European football, which they did with the RB model, and then RB set the precedent and made this ridiculous argument that they weren't part of the same group. I mean, ridiculous. But they managed to come through it. Now you've got this challenge. So do I think Nottingham Forest are in the business of looking after Nottingham Forest? And one of the things that when I was doing this television documentary and went over to America, which was and I'm going to go off on a tangent, but indulge me for a second, was the owners all work together in American sports because they're all united by an outcome which is based upon mutual interest. Relegation doesn't form part of it, and you've got a central theme, which is we all work together because we know that the outcome is going to benefit all of us. Right? In European football, it's a bastion of division and competition, and there's no two people that think the same way. You've got different ownership model left, right and centre, and of course you've got jeopardy, which is relegation and failure to qualify, which creates a culture where people don't work as business partners, which means you can't ever make changes that are structural to the sport because you're always going to have one person that argues against it. You're going to have Man City going into a room saying, I don't like associated party transactions. You're going to have Tottenham Hotspur saying, well, actually, we think there's a relevance behind that because you're utilising big businesses to be able to monetise your football clubs. So you've got that backdrop. So in that backdrop, why wouldn't Nottingham Forest stoke the fire? Why wouldn't Nottingham Forest say, excuse me, these lot over here, I don't think so. Make sure you sharpen your pencils. Make sure that you look at Crystal Palace in the way that we'd like you to. Crystal Palace ain't likely to be here again. So you're not offending one of the big clubs by booting them out of Europe. So, just be mindful of that. We expect you...
Almost like they're asking to set an example.
Well, for the benefit of them, yeah. We are. They're reminding. They're going to try and hold UEFA to the highest standard and say you've got a fiduciary responsibility to football here. And really and truly, if these guys haven't done what we did, which was what we did it back in March when we knew that the timelines would be in our favour and we knew that the structure was likely to be Forest were going to be in Europe. Palace didn't have that luxury. Palace didn't know they were going to be in Europe when Marinakis was busily concocting his blind trust. Palace were getting. Would barely beaten Millwall in the FA Cup fifth round or whatever it was. So with all that in mind, I'm not excusing it. I'm saying this is probably the reasons why I would perhaps err towards Nottingham Forest and the reasons why they're doing it because of the construct of football. I do think that the situation with Palace is relatively unique because the ownership model, whilst Parish is a very small shareholder, he is the executive control over Palace. It's been seen, you've seen the arguments between Textor and Parish when the loan signing rule was put into place and Parish voted against it and Textor didn't want it. So that shows you that who controls Crystal Palace Football Club. So the shareholding side of things, whilst it's a measurement and whilst it's the measurement the UEFA use to deploy multi-club ownership and significant control, in the construct of Crystal Palace, their chairman makes the executive decisions, but he isn't the majority shareholder.
No, because that actually, in an odd situation, the majority shareholder is John Textor. Correct. In terms of one shareholder.
Correct.
But the rest of them together make up a majority shareholding,
correct,
which allows Parish to have that power.
Correct.
And essentially, they need to convince UEFA that John Textor, who also holds a controlling stake in Lyon, doesn't have an influence at Selhurst Park.
But that's not difficult to do. The fact of the matter is you have a shareholders agreement which will represent that. They'll be able to show a documented perspective of the reasons
why.
You
would have thought they would have done that already then.
Well, they have, haven't they?
Right. So in which case, why has it still taken so long?
Because UEFA are either trying to find a way to justify booting Palace out, or trying to find a way to justify keeping Palace in. And of course, people like Nottingham Forest are making sure that UEFA have to work hard to make either decision. And predominantly in their argument, the decision that involves Crystal Palace being booted out of the Europa League.
Well, the UEFA's club financial control body disqualified Lyon, John Textor's club, from European competitions in December, but allowed them to continue in the Europa League, I think they were in, after the club met certain demands. It's to do with financial problems that they had, almost like breaching FFP.
That's a different dynamic, isn't it? Yeah.
But that just adds to the sort of intrigue of the story, really, because if they're deemed to be in breach of a settlement agreement at the end of this season, they could be disqualified for next season's Europa League, which could mean that Crystal Palace will be allowed in anyway, because Lyon aren't allowed to participate.
And maybe that's forming some part of it. Maybe they're looking at the reality of what the obligations they put on Lyon to allow them to continue to participate. Have they met them? If they haven't met them, then maybe the solution is that they don't have a problem with Crystal Palace, and then Lyon will be the ones that are arguing it.
There's a lot of legalese, but are you as convinced as you were, I think, initially when the first story broke, that it will be resolved and Crystal Palace will be okay?
I am. I have to say I'm not as convinced, but I'm moderately confident that Palace will still play in the Europa League. But like anything else, unless you're in the room, unless you're party to discussions, you can take an educate. I sat in this room 5 years ago and said, against the tide, there's no way this European Super League will happen. Before all the clubs played chicken and ran away and decided that they weren't going to do what they signed up to do, when the world was going crazy and everyone was going mad and this is going to happen, I sat in a room on the morning of the Monday after it was announced on a Sunday and said, they're close, but they haven't got it. That's because my nose told me that they weren't quite ready for this yet, and it wasn't really where it needed to be. And the way that it was announced, the way it was being done, didn't feel like it. It feels to me like Palace have just got enough to eke into a situation where they get past this obstacle. And it's more of a sensational. I mean, obviously, there was a lot of noise made about it. Mike Keegan, who's a great journalist, was talking about Parish's demeanour when he was over in Switzerland and how he didn't want to have a conversation, how fluid John Textor wasn't pleasant, he wasn't, and how unpleasant Steve Parish was. That to me is all background noise. I would assume if Leicester can find their way through minefields of not being caught by two leagues, I'm assuming that Crystal Palace, given what's at risk here, what's at risk here is a participation in Europe for the first time in the club's history in a major competition. I think also the potential future of their manager is at risk here, because ultimately not being able to play in Europe with a manager that wanted backing last year, didn't get it, got on with it, produced a team that was quite formidable last year and wins a cup competition and then gets excluded, I think could be an existential risk for the manager staying at the club. So there's a lot to play for here.
Palace fans, Forest fans, get in touch, tell us what you think. Are Palace being made an example of? A Forest right to try and ensure that they are? 03717223344. You can send us a text, a WhatsApp, 03717223344. You can text us 81089 as well.
Do you like what Forest has done?
Do you know what? I'm a bit sort of...
it's a bit mean-spirited, isn't it?
Split on... Well, yeah. I don't like the idea of sort of everybody going against one another and taking advantage of the other team. I think Crystal Palace deserve to be in Europe, but that's just the nature of football.
It's like leveraging a transfer.
Do you know what I don't like? I don't like the idea that you've allowed multi-club ownership, but yet you're then saying... But you can't do this, and you can't do that, and you can't do this, and you can't do that.
I agree.
You're putting rules in place and hurdles in place. So it's a pointless exercise.
I agree.
Either ban it and don't let people own multiple football clubs, or give them the licence to do that if that is for the benefit of football. Because the idea behind multi-club ownership...
Or be specific. Be specific. You cannot own any more than this percentage of a football club in any competition in terms of if you've already got one existing. I think you're absolutely right. I think it's important for them to be specific and explicit. The fact that they've paid this halfway house, and the reason why they've paid this halfway house is because the change of construct of owners. Owners come in and go, I remember coming in the door in my little world in 2000, and the first thing I did was take the Football League to court over a situation surrounding a player and the FA and the Football League because they were trying to get me to pay a player. I'm not having that. Now, football orthodoxy would have gone, get on with it. Me coming through the door going, I'm not having that. Now, multiply that by nation-state wealth. Multiply that by hedge fund and private equity. Go, hang on a second, I don't think so. Your rules are not fit for purpose. I'm going to challenge them. That's the reasons why you have to be really clear in what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, there's one text here that says, Simon, the ridiculous argument that Palace didn't know they'd be in Europe is rubbish. Every pundit and his dog said Forest would fall and finish mid-table. Palace had 3 or 4 games to be in Europe. I'm sorry, but it's a nonsense argument. Why is it okay for Palace and not okay for Forest. Sam, I understand Forest's objection from a monetary point of view. However, from a sporting point of view, surely Forest would have a greater chance to win the Conference League, whereas they would be unlikely to win the Europa League. That's from Jason in Exeter. I think,
but the revenues associated with the Europa League is going to be far more significant,
and also the prestige of playing in the Europa League is bigger, which is why Crystal Palace are desperate to get there. We have been joined by talkSPORT chief football correspondent Alex Crook is in the studio. Hello.
How are you? You good?
Yeah, very good, thank you. The first part of the transfer window closes today before reopening again on Monday, June the 16th, which I think is next week, until a deadline of Monday, September the 1st. So this window is for people really, essentially, that are in the Club World Cup, right? So they can get some big-name players in before that tournament.
Yeah, I think so. I think this was dreamt up by Infantino to make sure that the best players were all in America this summer, not least Cristiano Ronaldo. It doesn't look like that's going to happen between now and 7 o'clock tonight, so he won't be renewing his rivalry with Lionel Messi, if you like, but certainly Chelsea and Manchester City in particular trying to get deals done. Obviously, Liverpool have used it to sign Jeremy Frimpong as well. I think they were hoping maybe to get Florian Wirtz tied up by tonight, but again, those negotiations rumble on. Of course, Manchester United have also used the window to complete a deal for Matheus Cunha. I think it's been a very lively start to the summer so far.
Yeah, it has. It's been very busy indeed. And Chelsea and Manchester City, as you say, have been probably amongst the busiest ahead of their departure for the USA. Any business expected to be tied up today? Because they have been sniffing around a French goalkeeper.
Yeah, this is Mike Mignon at AC Milan. Doesn't look like that's going to happen now between now and 7 o'clock. Chelsea have told Milan that if they don't get a deal done today, they will walk away. This is a deal specifically in mind to get him signed in time for the Club World Cup. I think Milan think that's a bit of brinkmanship, and actually when the window does reopen, as you say, next Monday, Chelsea may well be back at the table. Chelsea were willing to pay £15 million. I think Milan value him at £25 million. Obviously a big gap in valuation. So, as I say, as we sit here now, Chelsea not optimistic that deal will get done. It's a slightly different scenario with them and Jamie Gittins at Dortmund. Again, there's a gap in valuation between the two clubs, but unlike with Mignon, they've suggested to Dortmund they're willing to continue negotiating throughout the summer to try and get that deal done.
Chelsea weren't expected to sign a goalkeeper because there was a lot of defence of the ones they already have, and they have basically a shadow 11 of goalkeepers, so they have enough to choose from. So why are they desperate to get this Mignon deal through?
I think they just saw an opportunity for value, so maybe they are going to be true to their word and they won't go above £15 million, and maybe they will stick with the goalkeepers they've got. Robert Sanchez is very admired by Ben Roberts, who's in charge of the overall goalkeeping department there. He had him at Brighton and was instrumental in his arrival at the football club. You've got Jorgensen, I think, came in and did okay at times. I still think it's a big problem, the goalkeeper for Chelsea. I don't think they've got
Petrovic actually saved the penalty against Albania for Serbia the other night. He made a great save there. Mike Penders is very well thought of. He was on loan in Belgium last year, but he's still a bit young.
None of them are quite the finished article, are they? And if you're talking about challenging for Premier League titles and being competitive in the Champions League, I think they do need a goalkeeper. But it'll be interesting to see if they do look at other options or if this was just something they saw as an opportunity. Of course, one goalkeeper is going out. Kepa Arrizabalaga spent last year on loan at Bournemouth. He's off to Arsenal to be back up there for £5 million.
Why would he do that?
Stays in London. His partner gave birth to twins, didn't she, sort of midway through last season? I think there's probably a family element to it as well. He's not going to play much, is he, for Arsenal? I mean, Neto went there. Did he play at all?
He played once against Girona, got caught out.
And that was a dead rubber, wasn't it, in the Champions League? So, yeah, it's a strange one. Interesting that Bournemouth decided not to try and take up that £5 million option. You wonder where they'll turn to now in terms of a goalkeeper.
Well, let's have someone in mind, bearing in mind that they didn't bid for Kelleher.
I think he's got a very specific type of goalkeeper that he wants, Andoni Iraola. That's why they didn't sign Aaron Ramsdale a year ago. Obviously, he's got links with the club, and that's why they went for Kepa Arrizabalaga for his ability to be a ball-playing goalkeeper.
Interesting. Okay, what's the latest on Thomas Frank to Spurs?
I think it will happen. I think it's a question of when and not if now. In fact, I think there's a deal in place between Tottenham and Brentford to trigger his release clause. We know that he's already agreed personal terms. I think all that's being sorted now is which members of his backroom team will follow him across London. So I think we can say that Thomas Frank will be the new Tottenham manager, as we've been reporting for a few weeks now.
Simon, how difficult is it to prize a manager away from another club? Or what's it like being on the other end of it when someone comes in for your gaffer?
It's frustrating. I always find myself in a slightly unenviable position when we're talking about transfer deadline day and stuff of that matter, because I realise it's content and we've got to create it, but I'd rather stick parts of my genitalia in a car door than talk about transfer deadline all the time. But going back to
what an image for everyone.
Going back to the question of attracting managers, I had it done to me on a number of occasions, and the challenges was
this is transfers. Just to clarify,
this is managers.
Genitalia indoor.
This is managers. Yeah, this is managers being taken away. I didn't take managers from other clubs. I always tried to find out who was available without having to go to other clubs. And
Why?
Go for it.
Point of principle?
There was a bit of that going on with me, and I thought sometimes that my principles were silly. I remember years ago doing a deal on a player, Dean Ashton, with Norwich and West Bromwich Albion, saying, look, rather than let Crew have all our pants down, let's agree a price that we're all going to pay and let the player choose the club. Which is, of course, Norwich went above the bid and then ended up going to Norwich. Didn't help them either, but notwithstanding that, my principles often got in the way, and sometimes if you're in a room full of people that don't have any integrity, you're going to find yourself coming out losing if you're the only person with integrity. But it's a challenge because it depends what sort of club you are. If you're, when Birmingham came for Steve Bruce, at the time, the perception was not that Birmingham had any more success in recent times than Crystal Palace. In fact, Crystal Palace were probably more successful during that time. But because Birmingham had a relationship with Bruce, because he was played there and been taken out of Man United and well looked after by David Sullivan, they were able to get into the manager. And then you're fighting against the backdrop of a club that's trying to keep a manager that doesn't want to go, that doesn't want to stay, or will say to you, well, I'd like to have a chat with them. And the moment a manager says to you, I'd like to have a chat with them, where do you go with that?
That's it, isn't it?
Hang on. So you go speak to them, you don't like what they've got to say to you, and you come back and do me a favour and stay with what you've got.
It's interesting you use that word integrity. I would suggest that Thomas Frank is a man of integrity, and I would also suggest that the fact that we know, and we've reported this, that he's met Daniel Levy on several occasions in the last couple of weeks, his paymasters at Brentford, I think, will have been kept very aware of those conversations.
But this is an easier equation because the industry has matured, right? You've now put release clauses on managers, so it's not a debate, right? If you make the release clause, I no longer have control of my manager's destiny to some extent, which says that I deny you permission to talk to my manager because I put a commercial decision into his contract, which says you pay me 10 million quid to release my manager. I am no longer part of the equation. As long as you're not trying to chip me on that, then I guess I stand still and let you do what you want.
Yeah, I think that's the sort of tone of it, isn't it? It has matured. The industry has matured. And interestingly, I think everybody knew the case because Thomas Frank was quite open when he was talking about it earlier in the season. He was saying, maybe I do leave for another club. Maybe that's what happens. Things move on. I won't be the Brentford manager forever. He's a grown up. They're a grown up. Matthew Benham knows what's going on, and he's dealt with this situation before.
And they'll have a succession plan in place, and maybe that might involve themselves going for a manager. Kieran McKenna, for example, who's already in work.
I would always look at Brentford and Brighton and say, they don't get many things wrong, do they? They're both cut from the same cloth. The fact that maybe Tony Bloom and Matthew Benham don't get on is a different discussion. But the fact is they came from the same industry. They have the same outlook. They buy and develop their football clubs in a similar way. So there's no doubt in my mind that the next manager to go in at Brentford when this deal is done will be someone they've considered properly.
Might be someone from inside or outside. What are we thinking at the moment?
I think all options are on the table. Simon's right. Much like Brighton, Matthew Benham makes these decisions based on his data model, so we go with what the data tells him, be that a Kieran McKenna, an overseas appointment, as you say, maybe someone who's already at the football club. It'll be interesting when the announcement does come, which coaches go with Thomas Frank and which ones stay, because of course he himself was recruited from within when Dean Smith left. And if you remember, he had a nightmare start. Was it no wins in his first 10 games as Brentford manager? But they looked at the data, they said, you know what? We're going in the right direction. Results will turn. It'd
be interesting to see what happens with Justin Cochrane, who is the head of coaching at Brentford, but is also part of the England setup. He'll be at the City Ground tonight. And he, I think, at one stage was working at Tottenham Hotspur. So there's all sorts of moving parts going on. Crook, thank you very much. I wanted to ask you about Dominic Calvert-Lewin. Stay or go? Just very quickly.
That's an interesting one. I'd keep an eye on Newcastle for him. Eddie Howe's got a long-standing interest.
Text messages coming in. I have fixed the machine now, which is good. If this was Real Madrid, United, Barca, we all know exactly that UEFA would find a way to get them in. It's only fair to let Palace in. They have earned it. That's Jeremy, the Everton fan. I didn't realise that Crystal Palace had been in this sort of situation before, when they qualified. Well, they finished third, didn't they, in the Premier? Or not the first
and the
division.
English clubs were banned.
English clubs were English clubs were banned, but the Liverpool had an extended ban, and then they ended that extended ban because Liverpool finished above them. They ended up going into the UEFA Cup.
Is that what happened?
Yeah.
I mean, my recollection of it was because English clubs were banned, but actually at that time Palace had a very successful season, got third in the league. I think the previous season they'd lost the FA Cup final to Manchester United, so they were in really good nick. Obviously, Ian Wright was then transferred to Arsenal. So yeah, I mean, Palace had that, and also
that's what I think.
But also, don't even get me started on the fact that Palace, when they were relegated in 1994, I think it was, when 4 teams went down to reduce the size of the league.
Yes,
and Palace went down with 49 points. 49 points would put you 10th now.
Yeah. Well, this season, yeah. Hi, Sam and Simon. I was lucky enough to meet Uriah Rennie about 20 years ago. It was a brief meeting at a business event, but I remember chatting to him, and all I can say is he came over as a lovely, friendly and polite man. I'm honoured to have met him. That's from Wayne, a Liverpool fan. Simon Jordan's famous "the rules are the rules" saying has been missing in this Palace debate. Hypocrisy at its finest.
The rules are the rules, absolutely. And it's Palace's job to make sure the representations that they put forward give UEFA the opportunity to look at their case as favourably as they possibly can. If Palace can't do that, then they will get booted out. So it's up to them.
Chris in Colchester says the multi-club ownership feels like another way for big clubs to benefit. Manchester City and Girona were both allowed to compete in the Champions League last season. If you own 2 clubs, you're not going to be able to get one club's manager or players to throw a game. So I don't see the issue really. We're going to discuss multi-club ownership with Stefan Borson, who's going to join us a little bit later on, because I think we're all sort of in this sort of zone where we don't really understand what the point of it is if you can't do the things that you want to do. Yet why is it allowed if actually it seems that the authorities don't want to have it available? Both season ticket holders this is hello both. Forest season ticket holder here. For the record, I think what Forest have done lacks a little bit of class. Palace earn their place in Europe and deserve a crack. However, rules are the rules.
I'm inclined to agree with that to some extent. I mean, I think that Marinakis is an unpalatable oaf at times and a bit boorish in his behaviour, but I also understand that for Nottingham Forest fans he will be viewed as a hero because he's the guy that dragged their club out of the doldrums of being out of the Premier League for 23 years, delivered upon a dream that other owners couldn't do.
He's done a great job.
And fights his cause. I don't like the way he does it. I don't think he should be spitting in the direction of officials. I don't think he should be marching onto the pitch and creating an outcome that creates a debate around his football club. I don't think he should have been employing Mark Clattenburg to create a culture of poor old Nottingham Forest in refereeing decisions. I don't think any of that's particularly palatable. But on the other side of the argument, if I'm a Nottingham Forest fan, I suppose you want someone to stand up for you.
And also, he himself, he's been the victim of points deductions and the timing of the Johnson transfer, which could have.
Well, that was his choice. That was his choice.
It's all the sort of same thing, isn't it? John Textor had the choice of putting it.
But I thought that was grotesquely unfair on Nottingham Forest. I think it's grotesquely unfair that any club that comes out of the Championship has to carry losses that prohibit their opportunity to compete in the league. They should be judged by the league that they're in, not the one they've come from. It's ridiculous.
And that's the whole PSR sort of constraint that's constraining everyone. It's constraining Palace, it's constraining Forest, it's constraining Aston
Villa.
We're
aligned, Sam.
We're aligned. And we'll talk more about that with Stefan Borson a little bit later on. I mean, I think there is a part of me that after that brilliant FA Cup final where Palace were superb, they deserve to be in the Europa League. They deserve to get what they've earned. And it is a bit of a shame that we're arguing about this, or we're not arguing about it, but we're in a situation where people are arguing about it.
This is what sports become.
It is, and that's another.
You've got to decide whether you're a sport or a business and allow people to arrange themselves accordingly.
Well, I'm afraid it's a business now, isn't it? It's a sport, but it's got a massive business element. Talking of which, what happens with Roman Abramovich nowadays? Because we're going to have Nick Purell in the studio over the next couple of days. He's written a new book. One of the only actually men that interviewed Roman Abramovich about the sale of Chelsea.
Has he released the money yet? That's not been released yet, has it?
None of the money's been released. In fact, it's been held by the UK government. And it hasn't been released to either the fund that it was supposed to be released to. I
think it's been held by the UK government because it's also being held by Roman Abramovich to some extent.
Well, wherever it is being held, it is not reaching where it was supposed to. Will he forever be persona non grata in the footballing world now? War or no war? Is the door of football always closed to him?
In whose eyes? If you're talking about Chelsea fans, no, because they will look at the fact that he financed a remarkable ascent for Chelsea, to catapult them from a club that had won a couple of things in their history to a club that dominated English football, certainly significant proportions of it, the best part of 2 decades. And it was only because of his money and his desire and his lack of preparedness to accept anything other than winning. Now, at the end of it, he got caught in a political argument. People can talk about the origin of his money. People can talk about the fact perhaps he was a robber baron that was the benefit of the way that the Russia was, or the USSR was broken up and the utilities companies were handed to the various people that were in positions of opportunity, and how his money was originated, and whether that should have been allowed in football in the first place. And football people can look at Roman Abramovich and say, well, hang on a second, what did he do for English football? Did he create the race to the bottom economically by the power that he brought to the equation, change the direction of travel, change the way that people did things? David Dean famously saying that, it was a Russian tank parked on our lawns firing £50 notes at us. And what did that do? Did it help English football? There's a debate that says yes it did, and yes it did, no it didn't. It certainly helped Chelsea. If Chelsea want to welcome somebody back, that should be their gift. Do I think he was good for English football? Do I think his motivations were about English football? Once upon a time I thought he bought the world's most expensive life insurance policy to insulate himself against the political outlook from which he originated and the challenges that come as a result of it. I have mixed emotions. I think there are 4 waypoints in English football in the last 30 years that have defined the direction of travel. The introduction of the Premier League, Alan Sugar changing the way players are valued on balance sheets so that players could be valued on balance sheets now, which made it a much more investable product, Roman Abramovich and Sheikh Mansour. And now we've got the 5th pillar, which is PSR, which is beginning to unwind the remarkable success that English football's had. And then probably we'll have the 6th pillar, which will be the independent regulator, which will probably do for it full stop. So I'm not sure how I view Roman Abramovich and how I view his contribution. If I'm a Chelsea fan,
would it be a multi-million pound business, the best league in the world, if he hadn't have decided to invest in July 2003, I think it was?
Well, the direction of travel for the Premier League was clear. If you look at the broadcast deals from the first one in 92 to the second one in 95 or whenever it was, to the third one in 97 to 2001, up and up and up and up and up. What Abramovich did was catapult Chelsea, and then what he created was an arms race, a metaphoric arms race economically.
Because Manchester United dominated the first decade of the Premier League, with Arsenal just about hanging on their coattails.
Man United won 4 of the first 5, didn't they? And then you saw Blackburn come in and do a mini version of what Abramovich did, which was Jack Walker deciding that he wanted a football club to buy something and build something and create something, and he went and did it. And it was his desire and his wishes to be able to achieve that. So there was an argument to suggest that there was a landscape that was dominated by Manchester United, and the fact that Chelsea came in there, but the manner in which there was no holds barred and there was no control, no governance, and the real beneficiaries were players and agents as a result of this enormous spend pattern that Roman Abramovich set the pattern on. So I would have liked to have seen the investment. I don't deny the value of the investment. I'm a great one for the investment. The idea that you bring investment into the English leagues rather than the other leagues probably has helped catapult it. But what we also have got is a complete changing of the sport. So I have mixed emotions about it. I was on the receiving end of the economic flip side of Abramovich driving the price up. Because whatever people say about drip down economics, and they don't work in society, they do work in football. The moment it goes up at the top, it goes up at the bottom as well. And every transfer fee, every salary, every agent's fee is inflated by the economics at the top. It may be small beer at the bottom, but it's not small beer compared to the relative income that they get.
We are in the process of getting Nick Purell in.
You're a Chelsea fan. You shouldn't get away from answering this question. Why have I got to do all the heavy lifting?
Well, look, I think what is clear is that the Chelsea fans would welcome him back, and he actually says in this new book, which we're going to discuss with Nick over the next couple of days, perhaps one day there'll be a situation where I could attend a match and say a proper goodbye, but nothing more than that. I don't have any interest in a role in football anymore, certainly not as a professional. There might be something where I could end up helping with academies and youngsters, giving greater opportunities to people from different backgrounds, if there were an initiative that could be making a difference. But as far as ownership is concerned, or a professional role at a club, I'm done with that in this lifetime. I know that Chelsea fans would probably welcome him back and obviously celebrate what he did for the club. Tell me I'm wrong here, because I said this to Simon, and I said it to you as well. I said I hate PSR. And the reason that I say that and I feel that is because I feel like Aston Villa are a prime example of a team that have done really well. And they deserve a pat on the back for the way they've conducted themselves and the way that they've played, the way that they've developed this football club, and they've taken it to a new height. They've got it into the Champions League. But them trying to sustain that is almost impossible with the restrictions that are placed upon it. And that's why I think there are some fans of football clubs who feel the same about other teams as well. But that's why I can sort of see the point that PSR is almost restrictive. Is there a point here, and it's not the only element of this, where the best intentions come with unintended consequences?
Yeah, well, of course. But, when this came in 2012, 2013, and it didn't start with PSR, it started in UEFA, and it started with lobbying from the biggest clubs. And there's all sorts of debates about where it actually came from, what its real purpose was, etc., etc. But let's be clear, when it came to the Premier League, it was about entrenching the position of the top clubs, because we just had the emergence of City on top of Chelsea, and some of the vested interests weren't that keen on that continuing, and there being other clubs to go into the mix.
So the big clubs want to keep their big club.
But let's be clear, a number of the challenger clubs, as we now call them, supported the implementation of FFP. So they voted for this in bringing it in. Remember, the clubs we're talking about, let's say Manchester United, Spurs, Arsenal, Liverpool, these teams, they only carry 4 votes, right? To get through, they needed 14. They got 14 votes. So a lot of the clubs that are now complaining about it were clubs that supported financial fair play when it first came in 2012, 2013.
Did they know what they were signing up for?
Well, they should have done, because it wasn't that difficult to understand the consequences and the restrictions that it would bring to investors and to investment. Because, of course, if you entrench the position of the top clubs in Champions League places, of course you make the game less investable. It's the flip side of the US market, where you've got, I heard Simon earlier talking about this, it's the flip side of having everybody round the table trying to build up the league and the value of the league and working together. What you do is you make sure, if you entrench rules that stop challenger clubs, you make sure that the status quo stays the same, and it makes it less attractive for new investment. So at the top of the game, because these clubs now, it's very hard to succeed at the top of the game. You need a wage bill in excess of £300 million. To have a wage bill in excess of £300 million, you need turnover to be over 500.
Yeah.
You can't get to over 500 million of turnover unless you're in the Champions League. Well, if you're not in the Champions League, you can't get the, so it's a
the
vicious
original
circle.
principles of which I was in favour of was that if FFP was brought in, it would arrest the vertical nature of every aspect of cost, from transfer fees through to salaries, through to agents' fees. And that was in part appealing. It would have been appealing to David Dean or to Daniel Levy to see that there's some degree of governance and control over what people can spend, because as I discussed earlier on in the show, we know that trickle-down economics does apply itself in football, because if you can spend at the top, then it affects every other aspect of the industry because it's bound together. So you're driving up prices. But it doesn't work that way. What it did was it preserved the cabal. It preserved the vested interest.
Well, you had it almost both ways, because what actually happened in the period just before PSR, and slightly afterwards as well, because of some of the allegations made against City, is that actually there was a whole load of spending from clubs like City and Chelsea that went to Arsenal. City spent, I don't know, something like 100 million quid at Arsenal. Right? Chelsea spent a fortune with the biggest clubs in the world. So that trickle down does work. It did happen for a while. It has been put off. There's a couple of clubs now that have tried to break the market. Newcastle, Aston Villa in particular, and look at them. They are very tight on PSR. But as I said before, PSR is now irrelevant, because either of those clubs, if they really wanted to, can pull the ripcord of doing an intra-group sale.
To be clear, it needs to be irrelevant, because it's eroding the very fabric of what we created as a result of the Premier League. By opening up the Premier League for business and taking everybody into it, we've created a challenge for ourselves. But the very investability of the Premier League now is becoming challenged by it, and PSR governance and football is being dictated now through the prism of PSR. It needs to be taken away.
But you would want some kind of regulation. You can't have a free-for-all. So that is the challenge. How are we going to get to that point?
Well, the good news is that the new UEFA model that's coming in is really simple to understand.
So first of all, those clubs are already breaching, right? So this is the other complexity. So I'm saying PSR is dead. remember, Aston Villa and Chelsea, according to the Times, have both breached UEFA financial fair play and will be punished or sanctioned in the next few days.
But that will be a financial punishment.
Well, it probably will be, because, and this goes back to the Crystal Palace situation, just to highlight the apparent unfairness of the Crystal Palace situation. Barcelona breached financial fair play by €267 million.
So just a small infraction.
Just a small one. And it was said to be deliberate by CAS. They got a €500,000 fine. And initially, UEFA wanted to penalise them with an €80,000 fine, but they said that wasn't fair.
Okay. Talking of investigations, shall we talk about the two big outcomes that we haven't had yet? What outcome will surface first? The investigation into Manchester City or the investigation into Chelsea?
I think City must be quite close.
We've been saying that for a long time, though, haven't we?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a lot of misinformation about that situation in terms of how quickly, if you have a 12-week trial, it takes a long time for the decision to come out. And in the outside world, it could easily take a year or 18 months in the High Court equivalent. So we're getting into the window now where the decision, feels like it should be coming out. I mean, this week felt possible. I thought that if it didn't happen in the international window that we had in April, that the parties would find a way with the panel to hold it over to the end of the season so that it didn't distract. We're now in a zone where commercially, if there's any influence at all from the parties, from the Premier League and the club, they would want to get that decision now out during the close season.
Not during the Club World Cup, though, I wouldn't have thought.
I don't think the Premier League will be bothered about the Club World Cup. I mean, I think FIFA might be. Well,
yeah, FIFA would be.
Will City be? I don't know. I mean, what's the alternative? The alternative is that it comes out in that 3-week period after the World Cup, but before the start of the season. That's suboptimal as well. Everything's suboptimal. But we're getting very close to a situation where if it doesn't come out in the next couple of weeks and then doesn't come out during the World Cup, you're getting very close to the start of the season, and nobody's going to want that. That is a complete disaster.
But if it's for Man City's point of view, if it's an adverse finding, they're going to appeal it anyway, aren't they?
Both parties might appeal it, and remember, this is only the liability hearing anyway. It's not the sanction hearing. Right. The sanction hearing, in terms of what are the consequences of the finding. Yeah, but it could be months, right? So, but the point I'm making, if we're going to get to a situation where, from a neat perspective, we're getting a decision that, let's say, goes one way or the other, you'd really want it out in the summer, surely. I mean, I know they don't control
the impact on the upcoming Premier League season.
The product. I mean, at some point, the Premier League, and City to a lesser extent, but the Premier League at some point has to care about its product, and this goes back again to the Chelsea situation. Yeah. At some point, you need to think about what are we doing to the actual.
How do you square that circle with the reality of what UEFA were prepared to do to Man City? Because they weren't concerned about the product. Their Champions League is a massive thing for them, a massive revenue generator, as much as the Premier League now. But UEFA were prepared to go, out you go, Man City.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, they obviously felt they were right. Likewise, look, the Premier League obviously thinks they're right. The Premier League has gone down a certain route and charging City with these very serious things because they think they're right and they think they're going to win. I mean, clearly. So that they've paused their concern for their product. What I'm saying is there's a limit to that.
Yeah.
At some point, you've got to go, right, well, we've gone through the disciplinary process. We've now got to get back to business.
But the process is that, if let's say, for example, we speculate just for 1 second, Sam, for a second, it's an adverse finding to Man City. It doesn't move straight into punishment. Then you have to then reconvene and determine the punishment, which can then take X amount of time, which then, when you get the punishment, then you'll have an appeal against the punishment. Yeah. So when I said 2 or 3 years ago we could find ourselves in the late, moving towards 2030, it's not beyond the wit of man to find yourself in 2027.
It's only 2025. I mean,
so if we get a situation where Man City are found guilty and then Man City wait to hear what their penalty is going to be, whilst contesting the guilt thing in the first place,
can't go to CAS.
Can't go to CAS. So you're going to be in 2026 before you've got a punishment determined. Then you've got an appeal against that, which can take 18 months.
Well, it might not be 2020. It might not be 2026. I mean, I think look
for a punishment, will be.
Well, it might be. Look, this is the thing that you're sort of giving a revelation here that is going to shock people if it is like that, because what you're effectively saying is we're going to have a decision at some point over the next 3 months, let's say, and then there's going to be a 3-month delay to hear the sanction hearing, and then maybe a 3-month delay well into 2026 before we actually find out what the punishment is. That's what Simon's suggesting.
I am.
I mean, that will shock people. And then on top of that, there will be appeal, and it could then go into another season, into the 26-27 season.
Let's halt there, but that could mean, of course, that the damage that you're talking about to the product will be ongoing, and they might feel as if they've got halfway down this road, they can't row back now. And secondly, Manchester City will turn around and say, well, we deny all sense of wrongdoing, so there won't be a punishment hearing anyway.
Damage to what product in whose eyes? Who does it diminish? The broadcast? We make this.
I think your question... in the worst case scenario for City, they have a problem with the Premier League, and City have a problem with what does the last 15 years
So what does that
mean?
do? So okay, in the broadest terms, what does that do to the popularity of the competition? The broadcast deals.
I don't know. Maybe it'll heighten it.
Nothing it'll do.
Maybe it'll excite people.